All right, welcome back to the 24/7 Sports Social Distance Chat. And now I'm pleased to welcome in a friend of mine in the business, Steve Palazzolo, Senior Analyst of PFF. Steve, welcome to Social Distance.
Hey, thanks. Appreciate you having me. And we're definitely at a distance here, working from home. It's great.
Absolutely. Y'all don't know this, but Steve actually cleaned up all the kids' toys behind him. We see, is that a water table or is that a crafts table over your right shoulder?
Yeah, it's just got all sorts of buttons that make noise. Yeah, I hid the trampoline and the kids' chairs. It's usually office/playroom over here.
That's awesome. So I think obviously with a football-based audience and an audience familiar with sports, a lot of folks know what PFF is. But for those who don't, could you kind of give us the 10,000-foot view of what y'all do, why y'all do it, and how it works?
Yeah, so we grade every single player on every play, and it started in the NFL, and then we moved to college starting in 2014. And when we say grade, it's from a production standpoint. So while coaches or scouts might be looking for traits or knee bend, and they're evaluating maybe the player as a whole, we are actually looking at each play and saying, did the left tackle actually make that block that he tried to execute, or did he not? Did the receiver obviously run the right route and catch the ball? Did the quarterback make a great throw, but the receiver dropped it? And we're trying to essentially assign credit or blame on every single play. I like to say we're trying to find the truth on every play. So if there's a 50-yard run, was it because the offensive line was incredible up front, or was it because the running back broke 6 tackles along the way? So we have a very specific rubric for every single position group. We put that data in on a play-by-play basis, and the outcome is production grades. I think that really that no one else does.
It really does seem to be y'all's lane, and I mean, as far as I'm aware, there's not really any major competing services, especially not anybody who covers college and pro, and like you mentioned to me before the call, even high school now. Just some questions about how this works. So y'all get the film at the NFL level. You obviously have the all 22. At the college level, I assume it's a mix, or do you eventually end up with all the all 22? How do you work that?
I don't think I'm supposed to be able to say, but I'll just say we have every necessary camera angle that we need.
Got it. Okay.
Coaches again I think they've laughed before saying, how could you do anything off of broadcast? But the broadcast angle, especially with replays, do actually help quite a bit, like seeing whether or not the ball was dropped or tipped and stuff like that. So we use broadcast angle, and we use wide, end zone, anything we get our hands on, so to speak. And I think we have what we need.
Gotcha. Okay, I think that answers that question. So you mentioned something there, and I'm a process guy, so I'm gonna hit you with some process questions. Then we'll get into some teams and players. You mentioned we're evaluating, like, did that left tackle make the block that he tries to execute? That, assuming that we don't all have the plays called, which I guess at the NFL level eventually we kind of do, right? When you're watching some of that stuff at the college level, it's probably a mixed bag. How do y'all work around that? You're basically just having to look at what the guy attempted to do, and we're sort of giving him the benefit of the doubt that he's at least the majority of time, at least he knows what he's supposed to do. Because if he doesn't, then he shouldn't be out there, right?
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot that goes into this, right? Football is an extremely nuanced game, but at the same time, I always look at it, it's like hours and hours and hours of nuance throughout the week. And then once the ball is snapped and the play happens, like inside zones, inside zone, outside zones, outside zone. And for the most part, you could tell players' assignments. So we just say, look, we're not going to guess what the guy's assignment is. We are going to essentially grade based off what this guy tried to execute. Now, where the nuance comes in, it's like, are the left guard and left tackle supposed to double team, and who's supposed to come off and get the linebacker and all that stuff? Now, those are the things that maybe they come out in the meeting room. But if he executes it well, did I even say that?
Yep.
If he does execute it, he's probably getting a positive. He probably did the right thing, right? If there's any doubt, and there are plays that have doubt, right? There are coverage busts. There are pass protection busts. We can zero it. And in our world, the zero is a neutral. We just don't have to assign blame on every play. And I think that's the thing that I've learned a lot from just being a grader at PFF is there's a lot of football plays where a guy does his expected job. And I think expectation is important. You don't coaches, I think a lot of times lean on, here's 70 plays in this game. You have to get a plus or a minus on every single play. For us, a lot of positions, just doing the expectation is important, right? And if you do the expectation for 50 plays and then you have 10 positives and 10 negatives, that might be what our breakdown looks like, where a coach might say, well, you'd had 60 positives and 10 negatives. You know what I mean? So I think it's knowing what expectations and the baseline are, not guessing if we don't know exactly what the assignment is, but generally you're going to have an idea of what a guy is supposed to do. And then we have a very specific rubric as far as, how we're going to put that numeric grade on it.
And of course, this is, you guys are on broadcast in NFL, like your stats show up on ESPN, on a lot of different media outlets, but this is not just a public facing product. I mean, I know you have a number of teams who actually subscribe, and so they're seeing internal private value in this for their own evaluation purposes.
Yeah, so we have every NFL team, all 32, that take our entire database, college and NFL, and then every college team. Well, not every college, but 90. I think it's about 90. We should be at least close to there by the time the season starts. I think last year we were closer to 75. All those teams take our entire database of information. So it's the grading. It's also all the other data that we collect on every play. Which route was targeted, what route did he run. We have detailed coverage information, where they play in cover 3, cover 1, in broad buckets. So all of this various information are going to all these teams, NFL and college across the nation, helping them in game planning, helping them in player evaluation, whatever it might be. And then continuing to grow that, really. I mean, one of the things I'm working on is to try to really help the NFL hone in on which parts of our data are most valuable, are most important when projecting players forward, and then helping college teams as well with different things like game theory and essentially what the data tells us. To me, it's two things, right? We supply this massive database and kind of let them work things out. And then there's us knowing the data inside and out and knowing how to maybe apply it to help teams, win games. So it's really infiltrated, both levels, I'd say, to this point.
That's awesome. I'm happy for you guys. I'm a big data analytics person myself. So anytime that we can infiltrate, to use your word, a sport that for so long has been kind of caveman-ish, right? And like there are some smarter plays to play this game, or smarter ways to play this game, and yet there are some also. I think the research shows some of the traditional notions also were smarter for reasons than maybe as outsiders we didn't realize at first blush. I want to take you back real quickly to November 7th, 2016. That was the day that Nick Saban was asked about a PFF grade, and he got really, really angry for a little while, thinking that he had a leak inside of his organization, leaking their own internal grades. Y'all had to be over the moon when that happened.
Yeah, it was pretty funny, right? He was it was the center at the time, and somebody said, "Oh, he's the second highest graded player on the team," and he's like, "How'd you get access to our grades? How did you know?" Look, we've had more and more of that through the years, right? We started and we were just like this outsider. People didn't know who we were, and you saw these player grades, and coaches were really protective. Like, you don't know what I'm asking them to do, and you don't know this and that. But the more we get in a room with people or have these types of conversations, the more we've convinced people, right? And to have Saban essentially say, "Yeah, I mean, that's our internal grades match up with those grades," and we have another team that actually stopped grading their players day after a game, and they just take our grades, and that's what they use as a baseline. And that's part of the way that they save time and efficiency, is just kind of like trust our evaluations of their own players. And I think the other thing that was public knowledge that's kind of similar there is like Chip Kelly. He was a guy, all NFL coaches and college coaches have to protect their players from the bad PFF grade or whatever it is. And Chip had done that in the media before. But again, I think it's public knowledge. Like, he came in, and I was one of the people. We sat down, we explained the system to him, and it is like speaking a different language, because they just see the game. I'm not saying they see it wrong, but they just see it through the eyes that they see it. It's just a certain way that they know, that they believe, and we're doing it from a different way. Again, it's not better, it's just completely different. And I think the detail-oriented coaches at least appreciate it, right? So Chip left that meeting and essentially became an investor in the company, and he bought in. So we've had multiple interactions like that through the years, whether it's a Saban or a Chip Kelly or whoever it might be, that kind of like bought in and said, "Okay, at least we're on to something here and doing something of value."
That's awesome. Last one on the process, if I can. It's just like plus, minus, or zero, right? You guys don't really grade like you don't get an extra bonus if you whip the hell out of the left tackle as opposed to just beating him, right? Like, so there's not a
No, you do.
Or you do.
You do.
Yeah. Oh, you do. Okay.
Yeah, and so I think that's what really helps to separate us here, right? It's like when an edge defender, when Derwin James puts the FCS transfer from Florida on his butt, right? That is a quick win where he's getting after the quarterback. That is different than like a slow developing win that happens in about 2.8 seconds. So the faster, the better you do your job, the higher the grade. And again, I think that's where we might differ from college coaches or any coach who might just say plus minus neutral or plus minus, or every now and again they'll throw a plus plus on there. So yeah, great plays do get weighed heavier. So at the end of the day, guy might have 10 sacks, but if those 10 sacks are happening, because the quarterback scrambled into you or because 6 other things happened and you just happen to get a sack, those 10 sacks look a lot different than sacks that happen from whooping the left tackle in 1.8 seconds and getting in there. So yeah, there are definitely levels of positives and negatives in our system.
And the inverse, obviously, that left tackle getting crushed. I mean, that's an absolute lookout block as opposed to a guy who gets beat, but he holds him up for like 1.5 or something. Yeah, that's Steve. I didn't know that, and so I didn't know that. I think our listeners and viewers may not have known that. So that's pretty cool. Let's go ahead and get now to some teams. Who are some of the teams? And we know we don't have the AP poll and the USA Today poll, but there are some media polls that have come out. The preseason magazines are starting to roll out now. Who are some of the teams who you guys are taking a bit of a stand on this year? You think, hey, like we really liked what they did last year. We like what they have returning, and we're higher on them than maybe the media is writ large.
Yeah, I mean, just starting in the SEC, I think Florida's an interesting team that has probably overachieved the last couple of years. And on the surface, I think it's easy to like Kyle Trask. I mean, the offense did look completely different when he took over for Felipe Franks, but we also had him probably on the more lucky side as well when it came to just his statistical output. His stats were pretty good. The offense looked better. He just got away with a lot of bad decisions last year. So Florida, we have as maybe one of the more volatile teams in the league. I could see a world where Trask is such an inexperienced quarterback does actually take this massive step forward, but based off the data, that isn't necessarily just going to happen, So I think Florida is a little volatile, and the nation might be a little bit higher on them. And then I think the inverse of that is Georgia, and what Jamie Newman did at Wake Forest was just spectacular, and the way they used him, as a runner, and he was one of the most efficient deep passers in the nation last year. So I think Georgia doesn't have any drop off losing Jake Fromm, and it might actually get better, with the development of some of those young receivers and what they do. So I don't know where the Georgia hype is, but yeah, I think we're big believers in Newman and what I think he's going to add to the table there, more so than JT Daniels.
That's interesting. So we gave Newman a 92 grade, one of the very few 4-star grades that we assigned Barton Simmons and myself doing our transfer portal grades. And he was a difficult evaluation for us simply because he was very impressive at times at Wake Forest. And then it seemed like against the better teams, his numbers did drop off. But you also had to account for the fact that both of their best receivers were hurt for large stretches of those games against better competition. So I was like, how do you really separate, that? Like, yes, he's not quite as good against better teams, which, but that was interesting for us. I think the national perception on Georgia is probably this could be the best defense in the entire country. And if the new offensive coordinator, Todd Monken, comes in and along with Jamie Newman and can spark that offense, then they could be something pretty special.
Yeah, it's really an interesting time in college football where I didn't think that the best teams would be able to actually separate themselves, but we really are seeing that with Alabama and Clemson and Ohio State. And I don't know if LSU is there yet last year. Like, is that really what they are, or was that just everything coming together? But it does seem like those high-end teams, and then Georgia's been in that mix the last couple of years, they have separated themselves just a little bit. I read your piece about the 5-star, the what are you calling it?
The blue chip ratio. Yeah.
Blue chip ratio. Yeah. I mean, that it does feel like those teams at the high end of that are at a whole different level, which I don't know if that makes college football less interesting because of it, but that I think was a little bit of the feeling I think throughout the season last year. Like, where were the big games? It just felt like those teams were going to win pretty much every single week. There weren't as many upsets till a little bit toward the end.
You almost wanted at times last year to kind of fast forward to the playoff. I actually just got done speaking about that with Barton on the Barton and Bud podcast, and it's like, do you like college football less now if you realize like Minnesota and Wisconsin don't really have a shot at a national title? But to say that almost implies that at some point in your college ball fandom you did think they did, and I never thought they did. I guess now people being more exposed to the numbers, perhaps they have a greater sort of reality check that there's very few teams who can actually take it home.
The thing I wondered about last year throughout the season, though, was is it because we've hyped up the playoff too much? Is it because, and I saw someone else make the point, so I'm going to steal it, but Oregon wins the Pac-12 to go to the Rose Bowl, and it's like, okay, great. Like you already screwed up your chance at the Final Four. You weren't going to make the playoff no matter what. Like going to the Rose Bowl used to be that amazing game, great feeling. Like great, you're going to the Rose Bowl. Now is just you're on the outside looking in. It doesn't mean as much. And I don't know if that's truly the perception nationally because we have, elevated the run for the playoffs so much.
I think there's something to that, and that's I think one of the worries that people have out there if they were to expand to 6 or 8. I mean, what happens to the New Year's Six bowls if you go to 8? I mean, that's really sort of a stamp as, hey, you're a really good team. You weren't a top 8 level team this year. You're not invited to the dance. That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
Focusing on specific players, and you obviously gave us Newman and Kyle Trask. Who are some guys who your metrics like a lot, but maybe aren't in sort of like the national consciousness yet? And then maybe some guys who are getting a lot of hype that, not that you think they're poor players, but maybe they still have a little more to prove via y'all's grading system.
Yeah, so sticking with quarterbacks, Brock Purdy from Iowa State, the numbers have just liked over and over again. And I think he's the guy you kind of watch, and it's like, yeah, I don't know what type of NFL prospect he is, but I mean, he is a really good college quarterback, and he's just got that ability to make plays inside structure, outside of structure. Is it Christian Barmore? I'm trying to from Alabama. Yeah, and he only played a couple hundred snaps last year, so he reminds me of Quinnen Williams from like a grading profile standpoint, where Quinnen Williams had 200 snaps, pretty much of excellent play. And then he comes out and has, All-American Heisman type of defensive player season. Barmore kind of has that profile right now. So he's, one of those guys that we're hyping. Jordan Elliott was that guy also last year, I'd say, from Missouri that had, they're my favorite guys to look at over the summer. The small sample size of awesome that just translates the next year when you actually get to expand their roles. As far as overhyped guys, I don't know where to go there exactly. I will say that I was on the Trevor Lawrence bandwagon as far as being generational, but that term I hate it, and I hate generational in general. But he's still not perfect, right? I mean, Trevor Lawrence as a freshman and a sophomore, outstanding, but he had some pretty rough games last year. And, that's allowed. Guys don't have to be perfect. But it doesn't necessarily mean he's this perfect prospect or slam dunk or can't have a bad game again like he did early last year. Clemson was just such a loaded team. Like Lawrence was terrible against Georgia Tech in week 1 and early in the season kind of struggled a little bit. So you just can't expect perfection because the hype's just going to be out of this world for him. And I think Justin Fields is closer to him than maybe people expected a year ago at this time. We saw Fields was awesome last year, but I think they're pretty close, I think, as players.
I think us in the media are very much looking forward to another Fields-Lawrence rematch. I mean, we had them against each other at the opening, at the Elite 11. We obviously got them last year. They grew up like 20 miles away from each other, maybe there in North Atlanta or suburb of it. That's pretty interesting. With Lawrence, it did seem like last year he early on was really more when he struggled. And I was wondering, do you think it took longer for him to adjust to the lack of slot receivers they had? Because Clemson obviously lost what's his name, who went to the Raiders, who was highly productive, not a combine freak.
Hunter Renfrow, who's catching passes from Woody Dantzler, I think, right? I mean, he's been there forever.
And then Amari, their other slot receiver who's very talented, was injured coming off an ACL, so he really wasn't 100% through the first couple games. And then they also lost their tight end, I think, to the league, and didn't really have much of a tight end threat last year. And in watching it, I was like, what? I was really trying to figure out what's wrong with Trevor, and it seemed like he was forcing some balls to the outside to Higgins and Justin Rogers. And then eventually he started using the middle of the field more. That'd be interesting to go back and look to see, what he graded on certain levels of the field throughout the season. My guess is that he probably stopped, throwing quite as many crazy balls to the outside and started using the middle of the field more effectively.
Yeah, I don't know specifically, but it definitely looked like he was pressing early on. And look, there's definitely this element of, hey, you're. It's not like Lawrence hasn't dealt with hype, but he just kind of like stepped in, took the job as a true freshman. You just kind of go, and you don't know any better. And then you have a whole offseason of like hype, and you're the next Andrew Luck, and you're this and you're that. And he's a human, right? So you have to, wear some of that pressure. And maybe he expected that he needed to be perfect. And I'll give you an example of where I think the PFF system does bring a ton of value there too. Was in the college football playoff his freshman year, he threw a ball, I think it was to Higgins. That was pretty much like a 50-50 jump ball, and Higgins just goes and wins. And in our world, a 50-50 jump ball, the reality is it's more like 80-20 that it's going to be incomplete. We'll call it a 20-80 ball. Like 20% of the time, the receiver is going to come down with that. So for us, the quarterback grade's the same. It's a 0. It's probably going to fall incomplete. You kind of gave your receiver a shot. But every now and again, the receiver makes a spectacular play, and you get it to steal a free 45, 50 yards, maybe a touchdown out of it. Higgins did that early in the game. And, of course, Twitter's like, oh, look at Trevor Lawrence. Look at this great play. And I'm like, well, that's kind of a jump ball where T. Higgins did all the work. So we're trying to, like, really isolate that. And we're going to give Lawrence credit when he puts it right on his hands and Higgins drops the pass. But for that particular one, it went Lawrence's way. And I think sometimes that's where player performance fluctuates. Hey, why is this guy struggling? Deshaun Watson a couple years ago was struggling early in the season when his guys were dropping passes left and right. I think it was his last year at Clemson, right? And it's like, why is Deshaun Watson struggling? Well, here's the context behind it. So there's always like a little bit of a story behind the numbers that I think the grades are able to tell a little bit better.
I think that's awesome. By the way, something else to back you up with Brock Purdy, I was sorting non-rushing yardage, non-sack yardage rushing stats for quarterbacks returning in college football this year. Purdy, actually not really known as a runner, but if you isolate his rushing sacks excluded, one of the best yards per carry as a runner among returning quarterbacks in college football, which kind of supports your grades there as far as making plays outside of structure.
Thank you for separating sacks. Can we just get that? Yeah. I mean, sacks are not rushing yards. Like, come on. NCAA's just got to fix that. That's absurd. I will say we usually try to make our stats match at the NFL level. We make certain stats kind of match the NCAA. We refuse to give into that. So we do have separate rushing stats from the NCAA, so the quarterbacks aren't getting those. Oh, he ran for negative 28 yards in this game where he got sacked 5 times. It just doesn't make sense.
It's not a rush, or at least it shouldn't be. I wonder if it's a relic from like the option era.
It has to be. Yeah,
that'd be my guess.
We couldn't tell if it was a pass or a run, so he just said, "Oh, it's negative rushing yards." But I feel like it's 2020. We can update that.
I agree. I mean, we absolutely should. And if we could get all official scorers to do the little QBX to signify scramble out of the pocket in their official, play-by-play, that would be awesome too. Because then we could actually separate like your rushes on pass plays as opposed to like designed runs or zone read type stuff.
Well, again, just to talk about our data just a little bit, that was one of my favorite things about Lamar Jackson coming out, right? Like Lamar Jackson wasn't all that accurate coming out. So all the negative stuff about his accuracy, he's not an NFL quarterback. If you said he was inaccurate, that was true. If you said he was a scrambler because he ran for 1,800 yards, like that was false because 75% of his yards came on design stuff. And when he did drop back, we actually tracked which read you get to. Did you stay on your first read? Did you get to your second read? Lamar Jackson went to his second read more than anybody in that draft class other than Baker Mayfield, and he was good at it. And he didn't scramble a ton. Like, he has it. He can pick up 50, whenever he wants, scrambling pretty much. But he likes to sit in the pocket and go through reads and progressions. So sometimes the narrative just doesn't match what the data actually says. Lamar Jackson is a pocket passer who, by the way, is the most dynamic designed runner in all of football.
That's a really good distinction, Steve. I like that. Okay, I'm going to get you out of here on this unless we find more stuff to talk about, which we might. So Trey Lance, North Dakota State quarterback from a very small town in kind of rural southwest Minnesota. North Dakota State gets him. It looks like he could be, this is very early hype, but could be a first rounder. But that's the FCS level. How do you go about grading FCS? Do you all grade FCS? And how do you go about kind of squaring that level of competition against what we see at the FBS and against other conferences?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. And so we've started to grade FCS over the last couple of years. Every now and again, when Carson Wentz came out, the NFL said, hey, we would love to have this full data set. And it was easy to just do one team here and there. we've gotten more of those requests through the years, so we'll grab an extra 15 or 20 teams every year now. So we have last season graded, and I can actually pull up where he landed here. I think the stats in the grades matched up pretty well. I mean, he was outstanding. I think going into the season right now for us, he's going to be QB3. The challenge with the FCS level, we're not necessarily adjusting our grading for competition, but there are certain positions like quarterback where it's like, hey, 15-yard out is a 15-yard out. And, the best quarterbacks in the NFL and the best quarterbacks in college, they throw the ball accurately from a clean pocket. They actually do the easy stuff, the quote-unquote easy stuff well. So while the highlight reels are playing under pressure and scrambles outside the pocket, the best quarterbacks, they're in the pocket 70, 75, 80% of the time. The best quarterbacks don't miss a ton of throws, and they execute. They throw the ball accurately when they're supposed to. So Trey Lance did that. I think the fact that he had no interceptions might be overblown a little bit for us. He had 5 what we call turnover-worthy plays. So that includes fumbles, that includes passes that should have been picked. So I think on one hand, you don't go too crazy with the stats. You add some context to the stats. He didn't have to make a ton of incredible throws, but he was very efficient. He's still really young as a player. So you have to add all that contextual information in there. But yeah, I think he's legit, and he's very much in that QB3 conversation from an NFL standpoint when it comes to Lawrence and Fields, and then massive question marks. Lance is right there.
I mean, this could be a pretty special draft with Trevor and Justin, and then obviously, Purdy. I think we'll get a look with Trey, and this could be a fun year of college football. Fingers crossed that it happens on time.
Yeah.
Steve, I really appreciate you coming on our social distance chat. If you could tell us where to find you, obviously pff.com, but also shout out your Twitter handle.
Yeah, so I'm at PFF_Steve. We got all those PFFs at the beginning of our name. And PFF.com. We got full NFL coverage, draft coverage, and then our college coverage. We have a college football magazine a digital magazine they're trying to bring out this year. So I'm not a part of that, but I can't wait to see what the guys do over at PFF.com.
Awesome. Thanks again.